Hello! In this video I'm going to talk about my second year in Australia. I originally started my channel to talk about traveling, so my first video is my visit to the Australia Zoo in August of 2017. And then after that I vlogged a trip to Walt Disney World with Riley, my ex-boyfriend, and I. Those are still up there. And then some of my other early videos are my first little updates when I did a working holiday visa in Australia. I didn't post consistently or anything, but I did post every once in a while about how I was doing and what was happening. I think my first year basically could be summed up with the idea of jewelry store, moving around, farm work. So I don't really have much else to add about my first year. I think it was a pretty typical working holiday year. You know, I got to Melbourne, found a job, found a place to live, ended up living in 2 different houses because of subleasing a room and then moving into another subletted room. Then I did my farm work. I have a couple videos on my farm work and did that, and then went away to Southeast Asia where I ended up breaking my foot, went home for a summer, and then went back to Australia. So my second year in Australia was a bit hindered. My original plan was to spend a good chunk of it in Melbourne, at least the warm weather in the summer, because I love Melbourne. It's probably my favorite city that I've ever been to. It just holds a really special place in my heart now, and it feels like home even though I'm not from there. So my plan was to spend from when I landed, which was late August 2019, until it started to get cold in Melbourne, and then for the winter I was planning on moving either to Byron Bay or maybe Sydney or maybe as far up north as Cairns. But then the coronavirus happened. And a couple other things. It's not the only reason I didn't end up moving. So I landed in Melbourne late August of 2019. It took me about 2 weeks to find a job. I ended up working at a backpackers, which I absolutely loved. It's probably my favorite job I've ever worked. So I was a receptionist at a hostel in the CBD of Melbourne, right near Flinders Street train station, and actually right down the street from my job at the jewelry store. I found an apartment that I really liked, living with a friend of a friend. So I lived there for the entirety of my time in Melbourne, other than a brief stint subletting from my friend Amanda while she was home, and then once she got back I moved into my apartment with Matt, was his name. I worked at the hostel, which I really loved. I started dating someone in October of 2019 who was Australian, so he and I started seeing each other, and that obviously, you know, makes you want to stay in a place as well when you date someone and you like them. So I was very happy staying in Melbourne, worked all through the holidays, worked on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day, and really, really loved it. Even though I was working the holiday, I enjoyed it. The pay is way better in Australia than it is in the States for holidays. And then also at the hostel, everybody was really nice, and so I had people on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day making me food, bringing me chocolates, you know, just it felt like a big family, which I really, really loved. Christmas Day, I did feel pretty homesick. I did cry at work, but I just told people it was because I was homesick, which I was. Christmas is really a big deal in my family. My mom does a really beautiful job at Christmas time, and I just missed that. So I did tell my coworkers that I was with that I just felt a little homesick, but you know, that happens and it was okay. And I ended up doing a fun thing after work on Christmas Day. I went to a park picnic, which a lot of people do in Australia because it's warm and it's nice out, and then I went to a friend's family Christmas, which was really nice of her to invite me as well. So then coming into 2020, I was still dating the Australian boy that I was seeing, and my parents started talking about visiting in April. So January, February, I started planning their trip. I actually booked a lot of stuff, got everything organized. We were going to do a really great like 2.5, 3-week trip and try to almost replicate the trip that I took in 2017 because there was a lot of stuff I did that my mom wanted to do. So we were looking through all of that. We started booking things, and then obviously the coronavirus hit. I have early journal entries from 2020 where I start mentioning the virus because obviously working at a hostel, we were dealing with it kind of as it was happening. So, you know, my boyfriend at the time worked in a restaurant, and I felt like I knew more about coronavirus than he did, especially at the beginning, because we were dealing with updates from the government about traveling basically every day at a certain point, whereas because it hadn't really hit Australia yet, he was kind of blissfully unaware still. So it was in March that my parents decided to cancel their trip. Australia announced that they were closing their international borders. There was a lot of panic. We were trying to figure out cleaning protocols. There was a big PPE shortage in Australia, so you had some people wearing masks, others not. It was very hectic. And then as soon as they closed the international borders, we basically experienced a mass exodus where everyone in the hostel was trying to get home. I was trying to figure out if I was going to fly home or wait out the rest of my visa. And I ended up waiting out the rest of my visa because I think like a lot of people, didn't think that COVID was going to last for as long as it did. So this is early mid-March 2020, and my visa didn't end until the end of August, and I kind of thought, oh, this will all be over by then. I'll wait it out. Not everybody felt that way, and some countries asked their citizens to come home. So like Canada and Germany, I know both did. And at the hostel at the time, you know, these people are all trying to get home, and airlines and countries were changing their rules so quickly that we had people purchase plane tickets that morning, get to the airport that afternoon, and then they weren't allowed to board the plane because they didn't have a COVID test or they weren't a citizen of the country where there was a layover. And it was really frustrating to see these people pay all this money, and it was really up in the air if airlines were going to be returning any of that money. And I actually don't know what happened to a lot of the people that this was going on for. There was one young woman in particular who was from the Netherlands. I spoke to her mother on the phone because she was so panicked about her daughter getting home, and she had been exposed to it, and this was very early days where tests were really hard to come by, and it was just very chaotic. So we experienced this mass exodus at the hostel. We had 550 beds. We went from about 350, 360 people to 100 in 2 weeks, which is very unusual. And then we had another exodus a little while later where people realized, oh, this isn't going away. And at the end, the hostel had 50 people in it. I was able to keep my job throughout COVID-19, which I was really, really lucky for. So I continued to work at the hostel as a receptionist. My hours got cut, so I wasn't working 4 to 5 shifts anymore. I ended up working 2 one week, 3 another week. But I got really lucky that I was able to keep my job. Because I wasn't an Australian citizen, I did not qualify for any money from their government system, but I did get the stimulus check from the United States, which was helpful, gave me a little bit of a cushion for when I had to come back to the United States. Australia's first shutdown, at least in Melbourne, was 6 weeks. We had like a little time in June when things started to open up. I thought about going somewhere else. Things with my partner at the time were rocky, so I thought about going somewhere else and maybe trying to explore for my last 3 months of my time in Australia, but ultimately decided against it because I was worried about money since my shifts had been cut and I still had to deal with, you know, paying bills and paying rent and everything. And I didn't think I had the savings to go do any traveling, and things were so up in the air because, you know, certain states in Australia would close their borders really quickly, and I was worried about not being able to get back to Melbourne. So my last 6 months in Australia basically were dictated by COVID. I mean, I also had a boyfriend, so I didn't want to move away from Melbourne. But I think without COVID, I probably could have been pushed to move somewhere warm or at least do more exploring, like little weekend trips and stuff. But because of COVID, I was unable to do that. So there are still things in Australia that I want to do just because I didn't get the opportunity to do them. I wish I'd taken more time in late 2019 to do weekend trips and travel, but I was caught up in a new job and a new relationship, and so those things didn't happen. My second year definitely didn't go how I imagined it was going to in any way, and sometimes I'm still very angry about that, to be totally honest, and very upset because I had this vision of what my second year in Australia was going to be like, and I don't think that what actually happened fit that. But being angry doesn't fix it. So I've kind of moved on, and I think that I'd still do everything the same, to be honest, because I loved the people I met in Melbourne during my second year. I've met some amazing people who are still my very good friends, Charlie and Lisa mainly, and I wouldn't change that for anything. I loved working at the hostel. I loved the experience of working at the hostel, and without working at the hostel, what's happened since wouldn't have happened. So I'm very grateful for my time in Australia, my first and second year, even if my second year was very different than originally intended. And I think sometimes that happens and you have to roll with the punches. And I could have tried to find more farm work and stay for longer because there was a visa extension program. But I didn't really want to go work on a farm again because COVID was stressful and I kind of wanted to go home by the time I left Australia. You know, I really miss Australia. I really love it, and I think that sometimes I might view with rose-tinted glasses because obviously there are issues there as well. But by the time I was leaving Australia, I felt ready to come home. I felt ready to see my parents, and I mainly felt ready to find a space that I could call my own and kind of carve out where I didn't have to worry about a visa. I didn't have to worry about, you know, getting sponsored or getting married or constantly applying for extensions to stay in a place. I want to find a home and I want to kind of build a little community for myself because even though I love traveling, I think I'm happiest when I have my little community. I think my second year in Australia helped me realize that. I think I went to Australia thinking about traveling and moving around all the time, and I realized that being by myself and traveling, even though I like it and I enjoy it, it's not actually what makes me happiest, and I want that little community feeling, and I had that in Melbourne and I loved it. So that's what I'm looking for now. I am really grateful for my time in Australia, and I wouldn't change it, even though my second year was very different than intended because of COVID and a boyfriend. So thank you so much. Let me know where you're gonna go first when we finally get to travel again. I know my list is never ending. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.